When President Trump entered office for the second time, some observers worried that he would abandon Europe. This does not seem to have occurred. He threw himself into trying to secure a peace in Ukraine. He signed a trade deal with the European Union. He speaks highly of Ursula von der Leyen. What's your take on where Trump is headed with Europe?
Jacob, this is a great question. I think that if one is to look at the Trump administration, one of the ways in which we should think about it is that he's been looking to renegotiate the condo fees of global leadership, burden sharing. And so since the Eisenhower administration, there have been attempts to get the Europeans to spend more on their own defense. I think Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and Donald Trump's approach to saying we need to having an honest and candid discussions with our European allies to say you need to step up has prompted a major rethink, starting in his first term and now in his second term, to get them to agree to a 5% spend. And many of them are going to do that. I think the only country at this point who's not said they're willing to do that is Spain. Now, let's see where we are in time, but ultimately we're going to see all of these countries spend more on their own defense. So it's an important triumph that people have talked about, experts have talked about, diplomats have talked about for decades and decades. President Trump has achieved that. I also think what's important about his engagement in Europe is to say, look, he's, for example, just recently he has said, I'm willing to add more additional sanctions on Russia, but you have to stop buying Russian gas. So, for example, I'm not going to name any names of countries. I can think of some major countries, though, in Europe that buy more Russian gas today than provide military or economic aid to Ukraine.
Our German friends, for example.
Yeah, so I can think of others as well, and these are countries I like. I have friends there in the governments, and these are our allies, and I think it's beyond hypocritical if you're buying more Russian gas today than providing assistance to Ukraine. It's deeply hypocritical. So I think he is trying to get them to focus. He talked about this in the first term, saying Nord Stream is a problem, and many clever people in Europe laughed at him. He was right. And so now he's trying to force them, just as he is on NATO. Russia has had all sorts of leverage. We need to find replacements for Russian gas. Jacob, one of the opportunities for replacements of Russian gas is Ukrainian gas. There is gas in Ukraine. It's never been fully developed. I think partially because of Russian interventions, knowing that there's the potential, they've stymied it for 30 years. So we should be looking at the potential for developing Russian gas. We should be looking at the potential to deepen America's LNG connectivity with Europe. We should be looking at the potential Norway and Qatar and other alternatives to Russian gas. But we have got to get a divorce. The Europeans must get a divorce from Russian gas. It creates all sorts of problems.
Another area that you've been following closely, I believe, is Greenland.
Yes. I was hoping to go later this month. I have a friend who's Mr. Greenland. I'm not going to name his name, but he's an American who's lived in Greenland for an extended period of time.
I think there's a Greenland caucus in Congress now, too.
This is a good thing. So I think one of the things, President Trump did a great thing by focusing attention on Greenland. We've had a historic, if you go back and look, starting in the 1860s, really starting with whaling, and then as America emerged as a global power, there started to be security. There were economic interests in Greenland around sort of having a port for whalers from American whalers, but also security concerns to make sure that no European power used Greenland as a jumping off point to intervene in the Western Hemisphere. If one looks at the continent of North America, clearly Greenland is part of the Western Hemisphere and part of North America in many ways. At the same time, it's enormous. I think it's the largest island in the world after Australia, if we count Australia as an island. It's enormous, has untapped minerals, and I think that we have to see it both in the context of great power competition, the context of Arctic competition, and in the context of rare earths and other minerals. we have to have a different kind of approach and engagement. Now, I think it means having we're going to have to continue to have conversations with Denmark, and it also means we're going to have conversations with the Greenlanders themselves. I just bought a book. There aren't a lot of histories of Greenland, so I bought one to educate myself recently. And then I also just purchased a book that came out last year called Fire and Fury about U.S. and German competition for Greenland during World War II. There were U.S. military bases in World War II in Greenland. There were also shortly staffed military bases by the Germans in Greenland. Some of it has to do with that Greenland is the kitchen for Europe's weather. So if you wanted to do weather forecasts for Europe, you had to have weather stations in Greenland. Don't ask me how. I'm not in the weather business, but that is a thing. And during World War I, there was some thought by Germany to try and use Zeppelins launched from Europe, restocked or resupplied in Greenland to attack the east coast of the United States. So, and then I'm sure you know, Jacob, that Denmark had colonial holdings in the Caribbean. And so after World War I, we purchased the U.S. Virgin Islands, which used to be Danish Caribbean colonies. And we attempted at the time to purchase Greenland, and Denmark said no. We attempted after... I believe
it was Truman that wanted to purchase
so then Greenland. The second time, I think there was a second... So there was a, let's call it a half-hearted attempt, and it came up in the negotiations. I think in the negotiations after World War I, the Danes said, we will sell you the Caribbean holdings, but we want you to recognize our claims on Greenland. And so at the time, we agreed to that. So then I think when we came back in World War II and said we by this time had several significant military bases in Greenland. And I think during World War II, I think Denmark was taken over by the Germans. So we had, in essence, de facto control over Greenland during World War II. And there were several years afterwards where we didn't actually relinquish control, I think until like the early 1950s. I need to go back and check this. But we negotiated a treaty in 1951, I believe, and maybe it was during the Truman. It would have been the Truman. Maybe it wasn't the. I think it was been in the Truman administration. On the issue of how the United States could engage with Denmark on Greenland, and the Danes have a there was more than 1,000 years ago, Eric the Red, who's seen as from Norway and then Iceland, went to Greenland.
He was a feared figure, I believe.
Feared figure, set up a series of colonies, I'm going to say from, say, the 900s to even as late as the 1400s. So for over a 400-year, 500-year period, there was a bishopric in Greenland. There were maybe 2,000 or 3,000, they were called Norsemen. But there's this claim, the claim that Denmark makes goes back 1,000 years because it was Norway and then Denmark, and then Denmark and Norway were a kingdom together. And so the Danes, in their minds, have this claim that goes back 1,000 years. Then I believe it was either the 1600s or the 1700s, don't hold me to it, there were Lutheran missionaries from Denmark who went to Greenland, partially in the search for lost Norsemen. They were trying to find lost Norsemen and reconnect with them because they had heard these legends that there were these Norsemen, and so we want to go find them. They never found them because they had died out. And then there was also a sense, well, there's maybe some mineral opportunities, and there were also some whaling opportunities as well, fisheries, etc. And actually, during World War II, one of the key components for aluminum was cryolite. Don't ask me what cryolite. It's sort of a clear metallic product that's critical for the creation of aluminum. So if you wanted to have a war machine, one of the two mines in the world for cryolite was in Greenland. And it was run by the state-owned enterprise with 100 employees close to the coast. And if Germany had attacked this cryolite mine and killed all the folks, it would have been a huge interruption to the Allied supply chain for airplanes. I had no idea. So there's all sorts of interesting connections, but I think we misunderestimate I don't know if it's emotional ties, but there's a sense of history that the Danes and the Norwegians have. And there was during World War II a little bit of counterclaims. The Norwegians came back and said, we miss our, so there was, so I think the question is, if we were going to have a different relationship with Greenland, I think we have to think about what we're going to offer the Greenlanders that's better or different than the Danes are offering. So I think we can't just say whatever Denmark is doing isn't great, which I think is maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. And I think the Greenlanders are open to a different relationship with us, but I think they also have had a complicated history with, in essence, colonization from the Danes. It's a complicated history. So how we approach the Greenlanders, I think, is important, and what we offer them is important. So I think we have to think about what our offer is.